Welcome to Louvre Abu Dhabi through the lens of l'école Middle East, an exploration of
the fascinating world of gemstones and their significance in art and history. Today we are honored to have experts from both the Louvre Abu Dhabi and
l'école Middle East who will share their insights on the exceptional pieces in our collection that feature these precious stones, highlighting their beauty and cultural importance.
at l'École Middle East we are dedicated to deepening the understanding of the art of jewelry.
And we are excited at Louvre Abu Dhabi to collaborate with l'école Middle East in this unique exploration of the craftsmanship behind these iconic works.
Our experts will reveal the history, cultural symbolism and artistry. Enjoy!
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Buenas tardes, ni hao, and marhaba. We are very happy to be here under the beautiful dome of Louvre Abu Dhabi. Thank you very much for having us here today, where we will dive into the beautiful symphony of gemology and art under the perspective of the collection of Louvre Abu Dhabi. We are very happy to be here. Thank you very much, Sophie, and thank you very much, Manuel, for the wonderful introduction. Let us introduce our speakers today. We are with Jérôme Farigoul, Chief Curator of Louvre Abu Dhabi, my other colleague, Chandra Horn, gemologist and lecturer here at l'École Middle East School of Jewelry Arts, and I'm Dr. David Sieto, art historian and professor here at l'École. Now, without further ado, let's dive into this beautiful work, shall we? Now, what a better way to start, I would say, than speaking about this fountain, right?
Yes, there is no better way to start dealing with stones than this wonderful fountain, probably made in Syria and installed in Damascus from the 16th or 17th century. And it really highlights the dialogue between the different stones, the different color. The game was also around the pattern, dealing one of main key of Islamic art, and really a dialogue also created between this old ancient artwork and the wonderful new architecture created by Nanjo Nobel for the Louvre Abu Dhabi.
Yes, and it's interesting to help us present our idea of Bejeweled today, because it's not just jewelry, right? It's our human instinct that spans across time, culture, geology, that we want to beautify not only ourselves, but also our environment. And this is a perfect example. And I love that you use the word stones, because it's not specifically a gem. And marble is not traditionally considered a gem, but it shares a lot of properties with gems. It is beautiful, definitely. It is rare and it is durable. And thankfully, because then we can have these absolutely gorgeous artifacts.
And who doesn't love beauty, right? Now, we've chosen here this poem of Emily Dickinson. It's called The Sound of the Trees, and it reads as it says, "A gem's quiet gleam, a silent muse, the light it holds for all to use. We wear the stars upon our skin, jewels from within, without, within." We are surrounded by art, we are surrounded by gems, right? So let's see actually how we as human beings, we've understood this throughout history. Now, in today's talk, we've decided to have 3 different parts where we'll dive into different chapters. We will start discussing about the universality of gems, how this concept universality, universal, have applied to us, to gems, to art. In the second part, we'll focus on the power and pageantry. We'll see how gems have always been associated with power, with authority. And in the third part, we'll dive into the sacred world and the secular world and how this combination actually work together and separately. Now, let's dive into the universality of gems. I'm sure as an art historian, as a gemologist, we can maybe have different associations, different concepts of universality, but there's something we've always understood as universal, right?
Absolutely. And I think if we look at the example of the fountain, and then in the next slide, The fountain is certainly a functional item, right? And so we've beautified our surroundings. This was meant, if I'm not mistaken, Jérôme, to cool inside a home, to provide a cooling effect. So really quite functional, but transformed into something beautiful. And if we look at these beads here on the screen, we can see that here it's very different. We've imbued in them a spiritual value. They're actually part of the contents of the stupa you see pictured in the middle, and we will come back to that. Now, I know I said that gems are rare, right? And those beads are actually quartz, which is the second most common mineral in the Earth's crust. However, when we have the right growing conditions, when we have the right pressure and temperature, and we have the right trace elements, quartz can actually produce these beautiful items like this. When there's iron present, this gorgeous amethyst, and these banded carnelian beads that we see here. And David, if I understand correctly, carnelian beads in particular are one of the oldest items we found in archaeological digs related to human adornment.
Precisely. Actually, carnelian beads were very widely used in ancient Mesopotamia. Actually, in the ancient Near East, there's one example that I actually studied on my PhD research, which is Ur, the royal tombs of Ur in modern-day southern Iraq, near Nasiriyah. And there it was discovered that carnelian beads were actually everywhere along lapis, gold, and other gems. So it's associated, and we know since the beginning, with power, with authority, and as you said, with ritualistic purposes. And precisely this reliquary that we will speak later on, and of course, the lapis right here.
Yeah, and the lapis I wanted to bring in because I wanted for our audience to imagine themselves in the footsteps, if you will, of our ancestors, walking along and perhaps quite literally stumbling across this stone. And you see this vibrant blue color, you see those golden flecks of pyrite that would have glittered in the sun. This is not the rock that you walk right by, right? This is a rock you look at and you say, this is something special. If I can pick it up, it's coming home with me.
And precisely, for example, they were associated with different symbols. Like in ancient Egypt, lapis lazuli was actually believed to be the hair of the gods. So the actual hair of the gods. So it's quite interesting association that we see right there.
And if I recall something, for Renaissance painter in the early Renaissance, the blue lapis was really the most valued color and the most sacred one to paint, for instance, the mantle of the Virgin.
Absolutely. Very useful.
It's quite interesting. Now, of course, if we keep digging into universality, we have decided to name here Drepting Pearls. Who doesn't love pearls? And in here, we've chosen to talk about this royal tapestry of a series called The History of the Emperor of China. Now, this is quite interesting right here because this is telling us about chinoiserie. Chinoiserie was this art movement, especially from the 17th century, that was associated with the love, with the obsession in a good way of China, in this way of the Far East, of exotism. It was related especially to the High Qing period, so there were a lot of trade coming from China, there were a lot of connection, and it was this reimagination of how China or the Chinese court could be. So here we have different symbols that I personally love so much. We can actually be here talking about hours about this art piece right here. We can start from the top with these grotesque images. We can go directly into the associated images of the emperor, of the court members. They were dropped, of course, in pearls, as we have started in the beginning, from the emperor until the court members, and some other details that will be going back before. Now, this tapestry was actually done in the Beauvoir manufactory, which was one of the most popular ones, right, Jérôme?
Yeah. In fact, the Beauvais manufactory was the second important tapestry factory in France. The main one was the Gobelins and stayed settled in Paris, and the second one, for a more private market, was the Beauvais one. And they will deal with the most fashionable subject of the time. And chinoiserie, at least, was one of the most fashionable subject. What is very interesting in this view of the Chinese emperor is that people knew quite well what was looking like a Chinese emperor, because Jesuits traveled to China. They come back with images from Chinese people, but at least the Chinese emperors is completely unrealistic. And what does imagine the cartooner of the tapestry is really taking new pattern from maybe people from theatrical costume to imagine what could be the Chinese emperor. We have to understand also that China was one of the main inspiration of art, opera, and theater in the end of 17th century or the 18th one. And we all know the Anne Galland, for instance, from Rameau, who deals with a kind of fantasy of foreign countries like India, China, and also America.
And it's also quite interesting to see this whole perception actually in China, because there was this obsession, this love for Europe, for the Western. So there was this also reimagination of how the Western would look like. Now,
So,
Mhm.
in terms of the pearls, though, that we saw on the screen before, those, of course, at this time would have been natural pearls. So I just wanted to have our viewers, if you can go back to the pearls, imagine again our ancestors and the idea of looking for food probably and discovering this spherical, beautiful object with this luminous glow. So, of course, these pearls at the time would have been natural pearls, and it's thanks to the structure of pearls that we get that very ethereal glow, right? They're thin layers of nacre, which is aragonite, and conchiolin that are piled in a concentric way, almost like an onion. And both aragonite and conchiolin are translucent. So the light can penetrate through these very thin layers, and the luster is not just off the top surface, but actually it emanates from within, off the multiple lower levels of these layers of aragonite, which is really what I think would have drawn everyone, evidenced by our outfits today, to pearls.
Exactly. And especially here in this detail that we see, because the emperor of China is wearing what is called the Chaosu. So this imperial necklace that was associated with the emperor and the imperial family, that they were actually given a status, a social rank, and only certain peoples in the court were allowed to use this until the roughly the late 19th century with the Qing dynasty. Now, if we keep speaking about the same tapestry, we see another detail that is quite interesting, and it's precisely what the emperor is wearing, the dagger, right?
Absolutely. And here, go ahead, Joan.
Yeah, it's a dagger was mainly a kind of diplomatic gift from the east to the east, from India to China, but also from India to the west. And what is very interesting to know about the gift made to the emperor is that the emperor couldn't accept gift because it was too important, and no gift can be as nice and wonderful for him. So usually they were given to aristocratic people from China, and then the emperor take it to them to have it when he likes them.
Very nice. And we can see the materials here, maybe a little bit more classic gems as opposed to the marble. The hilt would have been made out of nephrite jade, as most of the Mughal finery would have been. And we can see here beautiful emeralds and rubies. Now, although emeralds were very popular at this time, they wouldn't have necessarily been sourced in India. And in this period, they would have likely been coming from Afghanistan and even from the New World at this point. There are many fine emeralds from Colombia that are found in some of the Mughal jewelry, and we often see them engraved with either religious texts or even personal messages. And the rubies, too, at this time were very commonly used in the Mughal jewelry, and we see them here. They would have probably been sourced from the Moghazali in Myanmar, formerly Burma, as well as in India. And again, gems that were very often carved around this period of time.
Mm-hmm. And precisely related what you're saying, nothing of this would have been possible without trade, without the connection of people coming worldwide to trade goods. So here we've decided to use this Ibn Battuta quote, which reads, "From Mali's mines to China's coast, in jewels I see the world's boast, sapphire seas, ruby trails, stories told by merchant sails. So trade, of course, has been the keystone, or one of the keystones of our civilization, I would say.
It's certainly very often fueled by gemstones or the search for something of value.
Exactly. And speaking of something of value, we have here this beautiful garment hook, which was used actually to secure the garments. Here, it did not only have a practical usage, but it has also a beauty usage, which means it was associated, it was not only required to held the garment, but also to dignify the wearer, which means this garment hook right here was the perfect example of telling everyone how important you were. So telling everyone your social status and your social rank. And of course, it's mixing two of the most important materials in China, in this case, which is jade and gold. And even though gold was actually taken and transmitted to China through the steppes, it became a very important material metal into which they would, or everyone I would say, would apply our own mindset, right? And with beautiful detailing and beautiful harmony between these two materials, I would say.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I mean, I'm beginning to feel a little bit like a killjoy, right? You guys talk about the beauty, the symbolism, and then I'm like, okay, the ingredients. But here we have jade, and that's the term that we've been using. But jade is actually a term that refers to two separate minerals. And we have nephrite jade, which is what we are picturing here. And it is usually seen in more subtle colors, less transparent. And this sort of whitish color is often even referred to as mutton fat. And jadeite jade, which is the other mineral, which is not pictured here, is usually a more transparent and very vibrant colored material. And we've come to associate modern day China with incredible pieces of jewelry and sculptures made out of jadeite jade, when in fact the commercial importation of jadeite jade from Burma into China didn't happen until about 1784. So many of the objects that we look at and think of as and refer to as jade in ancient Chinese artifacts are going to be nephrite jade, as we see here. And of course, it's perfect for sculpting, perfect for the hilts, as we saw, because it is known for its toughness. Both jadeite and nephrite are formed of interlocking fibrous crystals. So by toughness, I mean the ability to resist breakage and or chipping. So very practical material as well as beautiful.
Exactly. And then when you actually see that this material is associated with the warring stage of China, which was a period very interesting to study as an historian, it's full of reforms, of military changes, of political changes, and of course art fluctuations. When we're in a society where there's so many changes, then it leaves a lot of room for thinking out loud, for thinking out of the comfort zone, and trying to develop more the artistic side of ours, I would say. Now, garnet. And this one is quite beautiful, especially from the Merovingian era.
Even earlier than the Merovingian, because it's one of a great highlight from our museum. It's a fibula from Damiano. And Damiano was a hidden treasure found in San Marino, in fact, in Italy. And it's one of the major remain treasure from the Goths, the barbarian kingdom. There are the Ostrogoths, in this case, there are also the Visigoth. The Visigoth is from the west, and it's mainly in Spain. Ostrogoth is from the east, mostly in Italy. And this hidden treasure was found in the end of the 19th century and spared between some private collectors that was gave to the museum the opportunity to acquire this wonderful fibula, and also in other main important museums such as the Louvre or the Metropolitan Museum of New York.
Yeah, and these garnets are an interesting material, and we see them here set in this cloisonnier style, where they've been custom carved for the little gold cells created to produce this motif. And the craftsmanship involved in the stone cutting for that would have been amazing. And garnets are actually a group. They're rather complex in their chemistry. And by group, I mean that they represent a large number of gemstones that share a common structure and a common basic chemical formula. However, we have over 20 different species due to the replacement and alteration of various chemical elements while staying within that basic formula. So it can be quite complex. And when we talk about the red garnets like we're picturing here, we're usually going to imagine that they're amandine or pyrope type garnets. Now, there was an interesting study done in 1998 on similar pieces at the Louvre in France. And they applied modern scientific testing to figure out exactly what was the chemical composition of these garnets. And it sounds odd when we stand back and we look at the beauty of this piece, like, what? Why not just love it, just appreciate it? What's the point of digging into that? And it's actually, I think it would fall under the purview of what's an interesting and a relatively unknown new field called archaeogemology, where we're really looking at and applying modern testing methods to the gems that we find in ancient artifacts in a way to better understand how they were valued in those cultures, where they might have come from, so going back to your trade routes, understanding the distance of exchange of goods and ideas, maybe getting a better understanding of how different techniques were shared amongst different cultures who were really separated by large distances but seemed to have come up with similar techniques at the same time. So it's a fascinating field that I think, the more we start to apply these tests, and don't worry, they're mostly non-destructive. So as a museum, we're not coming in and saying, oh, we're going to drill a hole in this, but it kind of really adds, I think, to blending together the history and the materiality of these pieces.
Yes, of course, it's very relevant to see and to add new knowledge about the question of such an object who, in fact, is really a mixed cultural object completely. The figure of the eagle is completely coming from the one empire, dealing with the Byzantine one, and the Visigoths knew quite well this great empire, and they really inspired themselves to create such jewels. And it's also, on the technical point of view, it's also the one of the first appearance, the way the cloisonné appears in Western medieval art, in fact. And the great fortune that the cloisonné had in metallurgy in Europe.
Absolutely.
And now in here, after speaking this wonderful garnet, of course, we have to speak about gold. Now, gold, as an art historian, again, I dive into the beauty of the material, of the metal in this case. Gold was associated with the yellow color. Gold was the color of Ra, of the ancient god from ancient Egypt. And of course, in this case, we've decided to showcase this lion bracelet from roughly the 9th century before Common Era. And in here, it's quite fascinating to see the images of the lion. Now, the lion, especially in the Near East, has always been associated with, again, power, so not surprising at all, with authority and protection as well. It was very common to see lions outside of the palaces to actually protect the place and avoid bad spirits or avoid even bad luck to enter into the palace, or in this case, that it averts something evil to happen to the wearer.
What is also very interesting is to see how the figure of the lion could travel from the east and from the Persian Empire up to the west. At the same time, in Greek ceramic, you can see exactly the same figure, very stilized and also very frightening one. It's in Corinthia, for instance, this city where there is a huge workshop of ceramics. They have exactly the same figures of lion. It's really a symbol of also power of kings, the figure of lion. You see it in Messenia, you see it here, and also in the ceramics. So it's quite common.
Even in the Katna Palace in Syria, that was everywhere.
Yes, exactly.
And again, to go back to the material itself, right? That's my job, it seems. Gold has been worked since we first discovered it. And the beauty of gold, obviously, is its color. But it's the beauty of gold from a point of view of craftsmanship and what we can turn it into is some of its properties, like the malleability, right? Our ability to flatten it or roll it. without it breaking. The ductility, which allows us to stretch it into fine, thin wires without breaking again. And of course, its relatively low boiling point, just over 1,000 degrees Celsius, which sounds hot, but we've been capable of creating that temperature and melting gold, which would have come in very handy for an item like this, because this would have been created using the lost wax technique, and then some details added probably with chiseling afterwards.
It's quite interesting to see and to analyze, actually. Now let's get into the second part, power and pageantry. And again, of course, we're speaking about power, as we love right here as art historians and gemologists. And of course, the first association that we see, or we decided to talk about, was this Japanese armor. Now, this armor, again, is not a mere object that was intended to be used during war, but this is beauty. This right here is also the personification of beauty and of something that goes beyond our mere understanding as human beings. So this was also very interested to see the connection with religious beliefs and the loyalty. For example, here we see that it's beautifully crafted in iron plated using the repoussé technique. And for example, in the helmet, it's quite fascinating to actually that we were only supposed to see the exterior of the helmet and not the interior. And when one warrior showcased the interior of the helmet, it meant that he actually was giving up the battle, was giving up the life as a form of a sacrifice.
And also it's quite relevant that in this 18th century, armor became one of the most powerful symbol of power in Japan, because it was a time, yes, the emperor was still in place, but in fact the country was ruled mainly by shogun. We have all heard of shogun, where you are the kind of different families who are fighting each together to have the power and over Japan. And the longest one and the most famous one is the one from the Tokugawa period, where I highlighted in at the cinema by Kurosawa, who have shown many moments of this of these fightings. So, of course, armor in this case is also a kind of symbol, and stayed in the house of the shogun as a presence of himself as a ruler of the country, of his people.
And especially knowing that this was actually crafted by one of the most important manufacturers, which is the Katsukade at that time. And Japanese armors, they were actually so cherished that they started to begin to be massively produced, actually to use.
And today we speak mostly about jewels and precious materials, but it's really a set of masterpieces from all kind of arts and crafts, because you got the silk, you've got the woodworks. It's really amazing pieces about arts and crafts.
Exactly. The craftsmanship makes it a gem.
And it's one of my favorite pieces, I have to say.
Yes. So yes. So the it's really a kind of illustration of what is a cross-cultural way we have an approach to the art with Indian miniature. Indian miniature, it's kind of cross-cultural images between Hindu tradition, Islamic tradition, because the Mughal were mainly so Islamic, were converted to Islam, and also influences of the French, the European tradition in the way of painting. The question of having a realistic portrait is really the European tradition of portrait. And we know that some famous Maharaja has collection of Eastern objects, but also of Western objects. And it's always a linked and cross-cultural connection that have been made between Indian people and the Western ones. There are a few settlements of European countries in India. We know the English one, the Dutch one, also the French one in the south of West India. And it was really a door and a gate to exchange art and artifact between the two countries. And you even know that an artist like Rembrandt, for instance, had the knowledge of the techniques of the miniature, and he copied some of the miniature he has seen in Dutchland, in Dutch.
And something that I also like is the little detail of the hands, as if it was on a window just looking outside. And of course, something that I completely love, and I think we all do, are the pearls, of course. So the more gems that the turban had, the more connected they were to authority, to power, and of course to once again showcase how powerful they were, how virtuous they were, especially by the use of pearls, and how powerful they are, not as a human being, but as something else, as the role in this life.
And the rubies here too, I think, also symbolize divine authority. And we see them very simply cut into beads. Maybe they have also been carved. It's wonderful to see so many gems on one person at one time.
It's never enough. And of course, gems were not only associated and were not only worn and cherished by human beings, but of animals. And what a better way to show how powerful you are, how powerful your court is, than to get those gems worn by animals, in this case, horses. And just like the lions, horses hold a very important role, I would even say worldwide, even since antiquity.
It really is decadent, if you will. When we look at how well bejeweled this horse is, we can see some dangling, what look like briolets of emeralds, perhaps, and definitely the pearls. Absolutely gorgeous.
Even the green background, which makes the gems even show more. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I personally I'm in love with this item here on the left, the Qatar dagger that we see, and for a number of reasons. I mean, it's exquisite. We see these beautiful cabochon red stones, and along the side we see some green stones as well, but also because it has been analyzed as well. And a number of the stones that are red that would have been listed originally as rubies turned out to be spinels. Now, this is not an uncommon confusion in the world of gemstones. We need look no further than the Black Prince ruby in the state crown of the crown jewels of England. It is not, in fact, a ruby. It is a spinel. And it's. I mean, there's a part of us that can understand they can both be beautiful reds. They can both be of exceptional luster. They have fairly similar hardnesses if you're looking at them from a perspective of fashioning them. But there's also another source, if you will, that's a bit of a sore point in gemology, and that's the nomenclature, right? And we spent a lot of time not being specific about the names of our gems. And if we look at the text called On Stones from Theophrastus, one of the probably the earliest written document that we still have, that it focuses entirely on minerals and gemstones, we can see that in there, although he's doing his best to describe as many gems as he can and in many details, he in particular uses the word anthrax, which refers to a gem of a red color that looks like an ember when held in the sunlight. And then based on how he further describes this material throughout the text, it's very obvious that at times he's describing a ruby, other times a spinel, and even sometimes a garnet. And even in modern times, we haven't done much better. Up until the 18th century, we used the term carbuncles, again a Latin term referring to a coal or an ember for all red gems. So we can't really blame them for the confusion. And you know, although we've come a long way in terms of the science of identifying gems, here they would have been chosen primarily for their beauty. And I think on that front, they did an excellent job.
Indeed.
And the parrot on the side, again, a lovely, absolutely lovely hilt of what was most likely a ceremonial dagger. And the hilt itself is made of rock crystal, which is not very common at the time. And the parrot originally held a pearl, a natural pearl in its beak. And this would have been a little bit, this would have been from the area of Goa, which in the 1500s, the Portuguese really turned into, I guess we could say, not only the capital of the Portuguese state of India in 1530s, but they turned it into, let's say, the first luxury trading center, that the original Place Vendôme, if you will, where they brought together, because of all the trade going through there, it attracted craftsmen, both in the art of goldwork, goldsmithing, gemstone cutting, and tradesmen who knew that they would have a market for all their beautiful gemstones from all around the world. And we're talking about the New World, so connecting the New World to Africa, to Asia, and Europe.
We're all connected at the end of the day. And we've always been, I would say. Now let's move on to sacred and secular. Such a interesting, I was trying to look for the right word to actually study this combination of the sacred world and the secular world, especially through the objects. Of course, let's begin with the reliquary in the form of a stupa. It was found in Swat Valley, so modern-day Pakistan. And what's fascinating about this object right here, first of all, is its shape. It's a reliquary, so it's intended to actually have the ashes or the remains of monks and other important, I would say, person, or depending on the role, into Buddhism. And second of all, it's the shape. It's actually in the shape of a stupa, which is connected to architecture. It's connected to Buddhism.
Yeah, all the stupa we know are the one are monumental. It's mainly architecture, and usually they are completely closed. You can't access through to the interior of the stupa. In this one, as a worker, and in fact, one of the biggest known today is to have inside all this jewelry, all put in little boxes. It's almost like, if you want to make an odd comparison, it's almost what we have in the Egyptian tomb, in fact, with little pieces dealing with some aspect of the dead he has inside. Usually, it's a saint. And what's interesting is that this stupa is coming not really from the center of India, but from the northwestern part of the country. In fact, we're the most connected part with Western world. And to have really to have such an object in such a part of the country with the most link to the Western one, and expressing such a very identitary part of Indian Buddhism is quite relevant also. It's a way of showing we have our face, it's in this place in Kushan Empire, in the western part.
And I really like the connection you made right there with the tombs, because indeed this is intended to last forever. It's intended to be just like a picture that is going to last forever, and it's intended for these objects to just be there until the end of times, I would say.
Yes, it's completely a tomb, a symbolic tomb, but it's a symbol. It's a tomb.
And we have a wide array of gems in there. Some that we showed before. There's also pearls. There's also some coral beads that we see. So again, gems obviously played an important role in the life of this person, and now in the immortalization of them as well.
Yeah. And of course, speaking of gems, we have this amazing object.
Yeah, kind of one of the most cultural objects we could have today in our talk with this Bejeweled vase. It's really one of the highlights of what is Exposition Universal style. It was created in Great Britain for British Lord Bejeweled was very famous for his collection of silverware, and he commissioned to Antoine Vecht, a French silver maker, this amazing vase, really very characteristic of what was Victorian style, in fact, dealing with Renaissance topic, also something was close to Art Nouveau, and he asked to Antoine Vecht to mount in this vase some art stone he had in his collection, some intaglio. He bought in the beginning of the 19th century from the very famous at those time collection of gems and art stone that previous king of Poland had and reunited together. It was a collection of the Prince Koniaczewski, and everybody thought at this time that it was really ancient and antique gems. In fact, it was not at all. At the end of his life, Stanislas Poniatowski lived in Rome. He died in Rome, and he asked to local stone engraver to make this engraved gems in the style of the antiques. So it's a kind of neoclassical gems, and yet more than 2,500 together. And Lord Bettersdale bought them, thinking that it was buying ancient gems. It was not at all.
They are still beautiful, though. There's some excellent examples in carnelian and some in amethyst as well, and agate that we saw when we looked at it the other day.
And especially here, what I would like to just highlight is the art of glyptic. Here it's a beautiful example of how glyptic, so cameo, so the carving of a heartstone, normally agate, sardonyx, and it can have a positive relief, so we call it cameo, or it can have a negative relief, as we see here on the sides, which is called intaglio that you mentioned before. So it's just unveiling the different colors of the layers into the same stone, and it's also to show how the art of glyptic is not only something that has been done thousands of years ago in Mesopotamia, but it's also something that kept being done even until today, until nowadays.
Thank goodness, yes.
What's good we've got to know about this vase that Lord Bettersdale asked to have it presented with a light inside to see the quality of the interior, and that's the way we present it nowadays in our gallery.
To make it even more beautiful,
Yeah.
if that's possible. Of course, this octagonal box, which is related to the Tang Dynasty of China. The Tang Dynasty of China, as an art historian, it's such an interesting period to study because the development of artistic movements. Tang Dynasty is normally associated also with a lot of different political movements, with a lot of different changes, but especially it's associated with the development of what we now understand as the classical Chinese society or the Chinese culture. So it's the development of art, of literature, of materials, of ideas, and of course this is a precious example of the craftsmanship that was developed during that time, and not only developed, but I would say mastered, and of course has different materials, like it's made of gourd, tortoise shell, and the mother of pearl, right?
Exactly. And we see here this mother of pearl inlay, which is spectacular. And mother of pearl is a very similar material, just very slightly different from the nacre that is deposited to create a pearl. And when we think of mother of pearl, it's sort of the inside layers of the shell. And you can see here in the middle, there's a iridescence that is showing there. And again, much like the luster, this is caused by the structure of the material itself. And you can think of the aragonite laying in uneven layers along the surface of the inside of the shell, creating very minute grooves. And as the light comes across those grooves, it's diffracted and it undergoes interference, causing these rainbow colors to appear. And we can sometimes see those in pearls, but it's really well demonstrated here in the mother of pearl. And the tortoise shell that is the base, which is predominantly from the hawksbill turtle, we see that beautiful motto color that we've come to associate with tortoise shell in general. But this would have been a material that took some skill to work. Tortoise shell is made up of keratin, much like our nails and our hair, or the hooves and horns of animals, but it has a wonderful property, which is that it is thermoplastic, meaning that if it is heated gently, we can bend it and shape it or cut it into different shapes without it breaking. And when it cools, it'll retain those shapes. So thin strips were used to cover the wooden surface of this box, making it look like it's entirely composed of tortoise shell on the outside.
Yeah, such a very really considered as the highest masterpiece of the Tang period. So highlighted that this box is precisely was kept in Japan, and one of the most oldest temple, the Shoji temple in Nara. So to show how the Chinese has influenced also the Japanese craftsmanship.
And of course, going from one object from the Tang Dynasty China, we're traveling all the way to Europe and to speak about the Medici family. Of course, Medici has always been associated with power. It was one of the most important families, I would say, of Europe, in this case, of Italy especially. And they were, of course, lovers of beauty, as we all are, and lovers of gems. And they actually commissioned this piece to have, why having a regular tabletop when you can have a masterpiece?
Yes, the Medici were very famous for the collection of tabletop like this one. And this one is probably one of the most important one. Francesco di Medici was a kind of art stone collector, but also he was a kind of scientist and a chemist. It's also linked with the idea of alchemy. And alchemy is also dealing with the symbolic of shapes and the quality of the stones. And in fact, this tradition went quite long, last quite a long time, because in the 18th century at least, we knew similar tabletop made mainly in a scientific way of dealing with stone. For instance, the pottery table that is in the Louvre nowadays, it's really a kind of a collection of the most famous stone you can find in a country. In this case, it was in Saxe. This way, it's mainly dealing with the shapes and the quality of stone in a kind of very humanist and symbolic way of dealing with the material. And it was designed by one of our ancestors at all for art historians, with Giorgio Vasari, who was a painter, a designer, and designed this table for Francesco di Medici.
And we see here, obviously, large pieces of lapis. We have a number of different varieties of jasper. There's also bloodstone that's used in there as well. And it's just amazing, the craftsmanship with regards to each shape and how they fit together like a perfect jigsaw puzzle. That must require an immense amount of skill and knowledge.
And of course, traveling once again from the Medici family, the tabletop, to this beautiful pavement fountain from Syria that we started with today, right?
Again, just to give you a view from the top to really appreciate some of those patterns that Jérôme was mentioning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really a way Islamic art deals with non-figurative artwork, and in fact, it had a great influence on modern painters, for instance, and for nowadays designers also, and of course, Art Nouvel, who design army.
And what a better way to end our conversation, to leave it where we started with the fountain, and of course, as we all love, poems, right?
Yeah. What a better way to finish our talk with Baudelaire, and with this quote from one of his poems. Astonishing voyagers, what splendid stories we read in your eyes, as deep as the sea. Show us the chest of your rich memories, those marvelous jewels made of ether and stars. So it's the end of our travel, I guess, and for our trip around the question of jewels, art history, symbolic of power and power.
And thank you for sharing your chest of treasures with us and letting us share them with the audience.
Yes, and of course, we've had our live discussion right now at 3 p.m. and we'd like to also highlight that it's gonna be broadcasted again tonight at 6 p.m. Paris time, 9 p.m. UAE time, and 12 p.m. in New York times, as well in English with simultaneous translation in Arabic and French. And of course, now comes to our favorite part, which is the live Q&A.
So thank you very much, Mr. Farigoul, David, and Chandra for this precious talk today organized in Louvre Abu Dhabi and with l'École School of Jewelry Art. As you can imagine, we have lots of questions. So perhaps the first question for you, Mr. Farigoul, which are the material used for the creation of the tapestry?
Oh, it mainly, so in Beauvais, for instance, and we always saw tapestry from Beauvais, it's mainly wool and silk, and they were specialized in these two materials. Gobelin was much more luxurious, and they use also silver and gold for the tapestry. But in Beauvais, it was mainly wool and silk.
So thank you very much. And for you, David, about the 18th century, you mentioned pearls with chandra, you mentioned jade. Which are the other materials we used at this period for the creation of tools?
Worldwide. That's a very good question because, first of all, besides pearls, of course, besides jade, I would even say we are in a roughly era where diamonds, rubies, emeralds, of course, are associated with power. Even the most important thing sometimes with these gems are the colors, and I'm sure Chandra will agree because in most cases we've studied gems that have been associated with rubies, but indeed they were not rubies. So I would, first of all, I would say the pearls. The pearls hold my heart, but of course, diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and all these gems associated with authority.
So thank you very much. Another question dedicated to the brooch in garnet. This brooch was worn by men, by women. Could you tell us more?
My understanding, it was often worn by women, and they actually would have had two, right? So they had to hold their garment together in two places. And you know, why use a simple safety pin or a button when you can have something as gorgeous as those fibulas? But the pictures I've seen in texts have shown women wearing both on both shoulders.
And we could also have the same question for the hook with the different plaques in jade and gold. Which function for these objects?
Normally they were worn by men, and normally they were associated with war or with political social status. So they were associated with power, and they were associated as a form of distinction themselves.
And I think they were worn across here. If I'm not mistaken. That's where I've seen them, but it's hard to find surviving pictures of them being worn, which is too bad.
And perhaps you have some information dedicated to the weight of the hook, for example, also about the armor you discussed today. Have you got some information about that?
What?
About the weight?
Of the armor? That's a good point. That's quite a good
Jero
point.
is going to let us try it on afterwards, and we'll let you know if it's heavy.
No, it's quite armors are usually heavy. They look very heavy, but in fact they are very light. They are where to be worn during the battle. Look, even in European art, when you got armors, you got to know that they are quite, except the one for tournament. When you got to fight, you are seated on a horse, and you got to just to fall from your horse. But for fighting armor for the battles, they are always light, and that's why we don't really realize this when we see them. That is a way of very exquisite technical object also.
And it's actually the epitome of savoir-faire, of craftsmanship, because indeed was not only intended to be appreciated for its beauty, but it was also meant to be used. So it needs to be, to protect you.
So thank you very much. We have lots of questions. Perhaps for you, Mr. Farigoul, as curator, which piece of the Louvre Abu Dhabi collection is your favorite?
Which piece? It's always the last one you acquire. It's always the last one you acquire. So let's come to the Louvre and discover our last acquisition, and we'll see which one will prefer.
It's pleasure. Last question for you, David, about the dagger, about savoir-faire. Is the gold work on the dagger is also a type of inlay? Which type of inlay it is with?
There were a few daggers, but certainly the one with the jade hilt, that is using the kundan style of setting and inlaying. So that is a Hindu word that refers to pure gold, right? So that it's similar to the idea we saw in the cloisonnier. We're creating these frames out of a very high purity gold. The gems are placed inside, and then thin sheets of gold are wedged into the spaces between the frame and the gem. because of gold's properties, it actually acts as an adhesive. Even at room temperature, it forms bonds, creating a tight seal around the gem, keeping it in place. That's the one for the certainly for the dagger with the jadeite. Yeah.
So thank you very much for this talk and these different answers.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Selim.
I'm happy to welcome you here too today.
Thank you very
Try
much.
on the armor.
Of course, here we like to mention, to highlight once again last time that we have different campuses around the world. We have different entities. We have two in Paris, one that just recently opened in the Hotel Merci Argenteau. We have one campus in Hong Kong, Shanghai, and very recently this year we opened in Dubai. But of course, we travel all over the world. We love to pack our stuff and then just travel all over the world to make jewelry and the art of jewelry approachable to all kinds of audiences. So thank you very much once again for having us here at Louvre under the beautiful dome, this beautiful space. What a better way to speak about art. So thank you very much all for joining us today. I hope you had such a great time as we had, and hope to see you soon, very soon. And we'll see you also tonight at the broadcasted talk. Thank you very much. And thank you, Jérôme.
Thank you.